The walls of Jericho stood like stone giants, imposing and insurmountable. From afar, the city seemed untouchable, safe within its fortress. But inside, life pulsed between narrow alleys, noisy markets, and shadows that hid more than the eye could see. Among those shadows, there was a woman. Her name was Rahab. No one knows for sure when she was born, but her story began in a house built on the very walls of the city. The wind blew strong up there, bringing with it the murmurs of the foreigners who passed through Jericho, travelers carrying news, stories from faraway places, rumors of wars and unknown gods. This is how Rahab began to hear about a mysterious people who wandered in the desert, guided by something no one could explain. Subscribe to the channel for more exciting Bible stories and activate the notification bell so you don't miss any videos. If you like the content, feel free to support our work with financial aid by clicking on the Thanks a Lot button. You can also become a member of the channel and enjoy exclusive benefits. She wasn't just any woman. She lived on the margins, selling her body to survive. Maybe she had a family, maybe she had siblings, parents, people who had once loved her. But in the city of the powerful, a woman like her was nothing but a shadow, a name whispered between teeth. Even so, Rahab listened. She listened to the merchants talk about the sea that had opened up for the Hebrews, about entire cities that had fallen before an invisible God. They said they were coming. Jericho was closed. The gates were locked. The soldiers reinforced the defense. The priests sought the protection of stone idols. But Rahab felt it wouldn't be enough. Something inside her told her that this God, the one no one could see, was different. And then, one silent night, two men arrived at her door. They weren't merchants. They weren't soldiers. Their eyes weren't there for pleasure or to rest from the road. They were looking for something more. And Rahab knew that her choice that night would change everything. Rahab was not a naive woman. She knew well the men who came in and out of her house. She could spot a disguised soldier, a lying merchant, a desperate traveler. But these two were different. They weren't carrying goods. They didn't have the restless look of strangers or the arrogance of the Jericho warriors. They were attentive, silent, observing everything around them as if they already knew what they would find. She recognized them before they said a word. They were Hebrews. Rahab's heart raced. Ever since she was a child, she had heard stories about peoples coming and going, armies marching, kings falling, but nothing compared to what they said about those men from the desert. They said they didn't have a king, but followed the direct orders of a God that no one saw. A God who had no statues or stone temples, but who spoke to them, walked with them, and fought for them. Rahab had heard about this God. It wasn't just hearsay. Egypt, the greatest empire on earth, could not stop him. Powerful kings tried to resist and were wiped off the map. Even the Amorites, Jericho's neighbors, were destroyed without their gods being able to do anything to save them. Now, these people were there, at the gates of the city, and those two men were standing in front of her. Rahab stared at them for a moment. Anyone else would have called the guards. It would have been easy. The whole city was on alert, soldiers patrolling every corner, ready to crush any threat. But Rahab didn't move. Something inside her whispered that these men were not the enemy. Outside, the soldiers' footsteps echoed down the street. Someone had seen them enter. The news would spread in minutes. She didn't have much time. And so, without hesitation, she made her decision. Rahab moved quickly. Her feet slid across the wooden floor as her fingers pulled the spies by the arm, leading them up the stairs without saying a word. The terrace was a tangle of dried linen, thick fabrics piled up to be worked on later. With no time to explain, he pushed the men under the fibers, hiding them among the straw. Down below, footsteps approached, heavy, firm, determined. The soldiers were at the door. She took a deep breath, straightened her dress, smoothed her face, and opened it. "Where are the men who came in here?" The guard's voice was harsh. Rahab blinked, feigning confusion. "Men? Ah, yes. They came, but they've gone." I think they left before the city gate closed. If you're quick, maybe they'll catch up." The soldier didn't hesitate. He nodded and the others ran towards the gates. There was no time to lose. Rahab waited until the sound of boots faded into the corridor. Then she closed the door, held her breath and climbed the stairs again. There they were, still motionless under the linen, waiting for a sign that it was safe to come out. She pulled the fabric aside, and the eyes of the spies stared at her, attentive, suspicious. "I know who you are," she said, crossing her arms. "I know where you come from, and I know that your God has already given this land into your hands. Everyone in Jericho is terrified. We know what happened in Egypt. We've heard about the kings who fell before you. There is no one in this city who does not fear the God of Israel." The spies exchanged a look. Silence. Rahab stared at them. "I saved your lives. Now swear that you will save mine." The spies looked at each other. There was surprise in their eyes, but also a silent understanding. They knew that this woman had risked everything. If she was discovered, she would die without mercy. Rahab approached, lowering her voice. "Swear by the Lord your God that you will not let my family die when Jericho falls." The confidence in her voice made the men nod. One of them stepped forward. "Our lives for yours, as long as you don't betray us. When the Lord hands this land over to us, we'll spare you and everyone in your household." Rahab felt the air heavy around her. Outside, the city was still sleeping, but she knew that sleep was an illusion. Fear had already seeped into the alleys, into the palace corridors, into the hearts of the warriors. Jericho was doomed. The spies had to leave before daylight, before the soldiers returned. Rahab led them to the window. Below, silence stretched like a veil over the night. The wall was high, but a path still existed. She took a braided linen rope and tied it tightly around the edge of the window. The dim light of the torches in the streets below cast dancing shadows as the men held her and began to descend. Rahab watched, her heart pounding. When the first reached the ground, the second soon followed. Before they left, one of them looked up. "Stay inside the house. Tie a red string to this very window. When we return, that will be the signal. Whoever is under your roof will live." The wind blew hard, ruffling her hair. The shadow of the spies disappeared into the darkness. Rahab slowly moved away from the window. Her gaze fell on the rope that was still swaying in the wind. She didn't know how long she had, but she knew that Jericho was living out its last days. Rahab stood there, watching the rope sway in the darkness. The silence of the night weighed her down, but inside her everything was screaming. She had made her choice. Now all she had to do was wait. Her fingers traced the linen fabric until she found the red thread, the same one she would use to signal her home when the time came. He held it tightly, feeling the roughness against his skin. An ordinary piece of cloth for many, but for her, the fine line between life and death. The days passed, like a blade cutting through time. The city was restless. Men marched through the streets, reinforcing the defense of the walls, sharpening swords, stocking up on supplies. Everyone knew that the Hebrews were near, but no one spoke about it out loud. Fear was a poison that ran among the inhabitants of Jericho, and Rahab saw in their eyes the same terror she felt inside herself. Her heart raced with every sunset. They would come. It was only a matter of time. And then, in the distance, a cloud of dust rose on the horizon. The army of Israel had arrived, but not as the warriors of Jericho had expected. There were no catapults, no battering rams, no sudden attack. Just footsteps, silent, firm, determined. The soldiers of Israel marched around the city once a day. They just marched. No war cry, no arrows fired, just the muffled sound of their feet against the earth and the echo of the trumpets that cut through the wind. Rahab watched from the window. With each passing day, her breath became shorter. The red thread was already tied. Her family was inside the house, looking at her with uncertainty, perhaps fear. And then, on the seventh day, something changed. The sun rose red that morning. A strange glow covered Jericho, as if the very air was charged with something invisible. Rahab felt it. Her brothers felt it. Everyone inside her house was restless, muttering prayers they had never said before. Outside, the Hebrews were on their feet. But this time, they wouldn't just go round. Rahab ran to the window. The soldiers of Israel began to march, one step after another, their sandals kicking up dust on the dry earth. 1 lap, 2, 3. The people of the city watched in silence, their faces tense, their eyes wide. Some of Jericho's soldiers no longer held their weapons so tightly. Others looked at each other nervously, as if they were beginning to understand that this was no ordinary siege. 4 turns. 5. 6. Rahab felt her heart rise to her throat. Her fingers tightened on the window frame as the red thread fluttered in the wind. They were on the last lap. Then, without warning, the Hebrews stopped. Silence fell over the city like a shadow. For a moment, everything was still. Not even the sound of the wind, not a breath from the soldiers. Then came the cry. The roar of thousands of voices exploded into the air. Trumpets sounded at the same time, a fierce, savage sound, as if the sky itself was about to collapse. The earth shook. The walls shook. Rahab felt the ground vibrate beneath her feet. Then it happened. The stones gave way. First, thin cracks, then dry pops, and suddenly everything collapsed. Dust rose like a storm, covering the sun, drowning out the desperate cries of those outside. The city, the one that had never been defeated, fell into ruins before Rahab's eyes. But her house was still standing. The smell of dust and broken stone filled Rahab's lungs. The air was thick, heavy, suffocating. Outside, screams of terror mingled with the sound of swords cutting through the wind. The city, which had once seemed unshakable, was now just rubble and despair. But her house was still standing. RAABE clutched the red string in the window, her fingers trembling, as if it were her last connection to the promise she had received. Her family huddled in the corners, wide-eyed, waiting for the doors to open at any moment and the destruction to swallow them up along with the rest of the city. Footsteps approached, heavy, determined. They weren't the soldiers from Jericho, it was them, the Hebrews. Rahab felt her blood run cold for a moment. What if they had forgotten? What if they didn't recognize her? The door creaked open. Armed men crossed the threshold, but they didn't raise their swords. Rahab's eyes met theirs, and in that instant she knew they had come for her. Come with us. Come with us now. His voice was firm, but there was no threat. It was a call. Rahab didn't hesitate. She grabbed her younger sister's hand and pulled her brothers and parents close. No one looked back. The path through the rubble was narrow, made of broken stones and fallen bodies. The fire was already consuming part of the city, engulfing everything that Jericho had once been. The air smelled of the end, but for Rahab, it wasn't the end. It was a beginning. The Hebrews led them out of the city in silence. When they finally crossed the wreckage of the gate, Rahab realized that she had left everything behind, her home, her life, her identity. Now she was just a foreigner among a people who still didn't accept her. The sun shone brightly over the camp of Israel. The desert seemed to stretch on forever, a sea of sand and stones that offered no refuge to anyone who didn't belong. Rahab felt the eyes on her. They were watching her. Some with curiosity, others with suspicion. Whispers spread among the tents. The woman from Jericho, a foreigner, a prostitute. Rahab didn't answer. She stood firm, walking with her head held high. But inside her, fear was growing. She had survived the fall of Jericho, but could she survive there, among those who saw her as an intruder? The days passed and no one came close. The Hebrews were a different people, and their laws seemed designed to keep them separate from everything impure. Rahab understood. She had been brought up among stone gods, used to a world where your worth was measured by what you could offer. Here, however, everything was different. They spoke of a God who not only demanded obedience, but who also forgave, who saw beyond the past. Then one day, a man saw it differently. Salmon. He didn't look away like the others. He didn't just judge her for what she had been. He saw what no one else saw, the woman who believed before she saw, who risked everything for a God she didn't know. Rahab didn't know what to think. She was used to looks that sought something, that demanded. But this one was different. And for the first time since leaving Jericho, she felt that perhaps she wouldn't have to spend the rest of her life as a foreigner among them. Time passed, and Rahab was no longer just the woman who had come from Jericho. The whispers lessened, the looks of doubt became less frequent, but still she knew she was a foreigner living among a people who, for centuries, had been taught to keep themselves separate from others. And then there was Salmon. He didn't treat her like a shadow from the past, or like someone who needed to prove something. There was something in his eyes, a quiet firmness, an acceptance that Rahab didn't know. At first, she didn't understand. Maybe it was just kindness. Maybe it was just one of the many signs of the God of Israel, the one who had chosen her before she even knew his name. But it wasn't just that. Over time, their meetings became more frequent. The words exchanged between them became longer. He listened to her, not just what she said, but what she didn't have the courage to say. And then, without her realizing it, the distance between them diminished. Rahab never thought she would find a home there. She never dared to imagine that after everything she had lived through, she would be chosen for something other than survival. But Salmon chose her, not because he ignored her past, but because he saw beyond it. And for the second time in her life, Rahab had to make a decision. This time, it wasn't to flee a doomed city or hide spies. It wasn't risking her life to survive. This time, it was something much simpler, and at the same time, much more difficult. It was believing that I could also be loved. Marriage happened, and with it came a new beginning. Rahab, the foreigner, the woman from Jericho, became the wife of a prince of Israel, and the future she had never dared to dream of was just beginning. Time passed, and Rahab was no longer a foreigner among them. Her name was no longer whispered with suspicion, nor her past remembered as a mark that could not be erased. Now she was part of Israel's history. The days in the desert were behind them, the wars ceased, and the people finally settled in the land that had been promised to them. It was there, among tents that became cities, that Rahab built her new life. Together with Salmon, she had a son, a boy with curious eyes and an easy smile. She named him Boaz. Rahab didn't know what the future held for her son, but something inside her told her that God had already marked out his path, just as he had marked out hers. And she was right. Boaz grew up to be a kind-hearted man, a man who years later would open his home and his heart to another foreign woman, Ruth the Moabite. And from Boaz came Obed. From Obed, Jesse, and from Jesse, David, the king after God's own heart. Rahab never imagined that her name would be among the ancestors of Israel's greatest king. She could never have dreamed that centuries later, the Messiah himself would be born from her lineage. But God already knew. From the moment she hid the spies, from the moment she hung the red string in her window, from the moment she decided to believe before she saw, her name has not been forgotten. Among the pages of Scripture, there she is, mentioned among the heroes of faith, among those who believed in the promise before it was fulfilled. Rahab's name has passed down through the generations. Time has erased the walls of Jericho. Kings have come and gone. Empires have risen and fallen, but her story has remained. Not because she was perfect, not because she came from a noble place, but because, at a decisive moment, she chose to believe. She could have clung to what she knew, to the fragile security of a doomed city, but she dared to trust in a God she couldn't see. She could have been defined by her past, but she decided to build a new future. Rahab teaches us that it doesn't matter where we come from, it matters where we choose to go. Looking at her life, we see that faith is not just a nice feeling. It's action. It's taking a step in the dark, trusting before you understand, obeying before you see the result. She risked everything for a promise, for a red thread fluttering in the wind, and that choice changed her story forever. And it wasn't just her story. Her faith crossed generations, shaped destinies, influenced lineages. The son she raised taught her the value of kindness and acceptance. Her grandson became part of royalty, and centuries later, the savior of the world was born of her descendants. Perhaps Rahab never imagined the impact of her choice, but that doesn't matter. She didn't do what she did expecting recognition or glory. She just trusted, and that trust was enough to transform a woman scarred by the past into an eternal name among the heroes of the faith. Her story still resonates for those who think it's too late, who carry labels imposed by the world, who feel they can never start again. Rahab proves that God doesn't choose the way men do. He looks at the heart, and when he finds someone willing to trust, even if they can't see the whole path, he transforms destinies. If you liked Rahab's story and want to continue following other stories of faith and overcoming, be sure to like this video and share it with those you love. And of course, subscribe to the channel so you don't miss out on any new content. Together, let's explore more powerful lessons from the Bible.